Good afternoon, everyone. We'll just give you a few more moments to let everyone get into the room, and we'll start promptly at 12. Welcome if you're just joining us. We're starting in 1 more minute. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 2022 Rise, Lunch and Learn series. Today we'll be featuring webinar number 5, which will be talking about climate change, Indigenous knowledge, and adaptation within the prairies with Bret Hussain and Dr. Mauro from the Prairie Climate Centre. Today is Thursday, March 7th. Oh, actually, today is not March 17th. Today is the 24th. And I'd like to review our agenda. First off, I would like to introduce our team. Myself first, my name is Chantal Henderson. I am the Indigenous Programs Outreach Coordinator for the First Nations Waste Minimization Program here at the Green Action Center. And I am Ojibwe. I'm from Penetang First Nation and Sagin First Nations here in Manitoba. And my spirit name is Sacred Tree Woman. So I will allow the rest of my team to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Smith. I am one of the community pathfinders with the First Nations Waste Minimization Program. I am a settler living in Indigenous territory in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And the community pathfinders focus on supporting communities with enhancements to their waste management systems in landfill or transfer station and recycling programs.
Hi, my name is Jordan Gabosh. I'm another community pathfinder with the First Nations Waste Minimization Program. I'm a Métis man here in Winnipeg and just love helping out my people.
Awesome. We have another Pathfinder, Cesar Flores, but I don't think he's joined us yet. Maybe he will. And our
I see that he actually just introduced himself in the chat.
oh, okay.
Says, hello, everyone. My name is Cesar. I'm a newcomer settler from Central America. I am also a Pathfinder and I am excited to learn. Says, apologies, I'm having audio issues. So I guess you joined as a attendee instead of a panelist.
I just upgraded him to panelist, so
Okay.
I turn on this video before we proceed. And yeah, okay. So we're gonna review our agenda. So we've done our welcome, our introductions. In case you don't know what RISE is about, RISE is an acronym for Recognizing Indigenous Sustainable Education. And what we do is we try to bring awareness and promote Indigenous-led First Nation projects, initiatives, promoting environmental sustainability in First Nation communities. And so that's what this webinar series is about. And if we're going to do a land acknowledgement before we proceed, and Jordan will do that.
The Green Action Center is located on the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Innu, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples. It is also the homeland of the Métis Nation. We acknowledge that our water is sourced from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation, and the hydroelectricity we use comes from numerous First Nation territories around Manitoba. You have to change your chat settings to all panelists and attendees if you want everybody to see your questions you have and comments. So everybody make sure to do that now.
Also, that's probably what our view is as panelists. Everyone can just click on everyone and just comment. And one of us will be moderating the questions. We'll have a Q&A afterwards. We'll just go back a bit. So video and audio is muted for all participants. This is just to ensure the workshop has no interruptions or background noises and whatnot. And yeah, so it's a seamless and we can focus on the presentation and speakers. Questions and technical issues, Amy?
Yes, I'll be making sure to monitor the chat during the presentation. And if you have any technical issues, feel free to find my name in the chat and I will do my best to help you out.
Same here.
All right, without further ado, I will do introduction of our first speaker. So our first speaker is Bret Hussain. I'll let him introduce his name. I don't want to butcher it. He's from the Gitxsan Nation of the Northwest Interior of British Columbia. Growing up in his strong matrilineal society, Bret developed a passion for the culture, land, and politics of his people, and a desire to share their knowledge and stories. Bret has worked in the film and television industry for over 16 years and is also a volunteer board member for such organizations as Ganiganichek and Sakaway Festival. The award-winning series Mothers of Gitxsan is Bret's first series of books and part of a larger vision he has in sharing the worlds of the Gitxsan Nation. As Bret continues creating new art and working on new books, he is also working with the Prairie Climate Centre at the University of Winnipeg to connect science and Indigenous knowledge. With the support of his wife, Jerry, and their children, Warren and Ruby, Bret endeavors to continue sharing stories with his writing, artwork, and photography. Just screen there. And Jordan or Amy want to introduce Ian?
Go ahead, Jordan, if you're there.
Sorry, it was taking a sec. Dr. Ian Mauro is the Executive Director of the Prairie Climate Centre and Associate Professor in Geography at the University of Winnipeg. Oh, here we go. He is a former Canada Research Chair, a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada's College of New Scholars, Artists and Scientists, and has served on expert panels related to food security, climate change, and energy issues. Dr. Mauro has developed climate change films across Canada with the PCC team, created that Climate Atlas of Canada. Mauro's journey has taken him from coast to coast to understand Canada's changing climate and its implications and opportunities.
All right, welcome. Okay, welcome to the both of you. Take it away.
All right. So everyone, good afternoon. I just wanted to acknowledge that we are working with University of Winnipeg as well as we are part of a group of climate research organizations across the prairies in a group called Climate West, do a lot of support work for us and help us share our research and knowledge and information with others across the prairies. First slide, please. Simgiget sigidam hana kan skobawilsuch hetchum sketchwa lach sinchich wil kalhuchsi wil good kanuch wil sowetwi. My name is Hetchum Get. I am Gitxsan from the territory of the Caribou Creek or Caribou Ravine. That's where my family is from. I'm an author of the award-winning series Mothers of Hsan. The next slide. The work that I do primarily focuses on bringing together the knowledge that I have from my people, but in particular Indigenous knowledges, and bridging that gap between our understanding of the world, the holistic perspective of the interconnectedness of everything, and trying to bridge that gap between science and our understanding of the world. So the books that I created were an entry point. It was the first series that I'm working on is for young people and kind of introducing an idea in a different way about how the world is connected. Typically when students learn a lot of this stuff in school, it's compartmentalized and segregated from one another. They're learning one sector and another sector, but not really understanding that every single one of these things are connected together. Next slide, please. So viewing every aspect of life as just a living and breathing entity is not just to serve religion as it's been described by Western anthropologists, but rather to distinguish the importance of respect, rights, and protection that our precious resources need to preserve for many generations into the future. And you see on the left here, that's an illustration from one of my books, The Grizzly Mother, just kind of showing the connectedness that our people have with all the other beings that exist within our realm. Next slide, please. So doing a lot of this work is really important and integral to everything that I have done within my career. You know, even though I started out in film and television, that was more to learn the craft of storytelling in the modern world and more to how to bring our ways of knowing into the new world. And working with other amazing artists such as Natasha Donovan, who's done these illustrations for me. And then I do a lot of the work with her. I have my Formline Art in the background there. You can see the designs that we do. And this is called Formline Art. A lot of people mistakenly just call it Haida art. It's not only the Haida that do it. It's many nations in the coast. So Formline Art is our interpretation of the building blocks of life, the things that make all of the energy that makes all of the living things exist, and even the inanimate things. So this kind of led into a lot of looking at how can I bridge this gap, and what are the things that we do. And the way that we look at knowledge is something that we share together from nation to nation. And you walk hand in hand with these knowledges to improve seeing how you can create better solutions in the future. And this in particular was something that really fell in line with what the PCC was doing, which brought me to work with them. Next slide, please. So a lot of what guided the PCC, as well as the work that we were doing with a lot of other elders and knowledge keepers, was a term coined by Elder Albert Marshall and his wife, called two-eyed seeing. And he defines it as learning to see from one eye with the strengths of Indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing, and from the other eye with the strengths of mainstream knowledges and ways of knowing, to use both of these eyes together to benefit all, to use both ways of viewing the world to see clearer into the future. So he really brought together that perspective. And it's something that's not new to Indigenous communities. However, he brought it in a way that allows non-Indigenous communities in the academic world and the rest of the world to kind of see how we share knowledges with one another. And it was really important to take their teachings that they have and utilize that in a lot of the work that we do. And that has guided us into everything that we have accomplished. And on top of this, more importantly, we have been guided by elders that we've worked closely with here, and relationships that we've developed, in particular with the late elder Dave Kershane. And we're going to show you a little bit of a video here about his journey, his work, and his vision that he gained through ceremony, and his elders and knowledge keepers. And then Ian can talk about more of how we were connected with this, with the work that they do, and how it's influenced a lot of what we do going forward.
We are living in an environment of chaos and uncertainty. The current reality that we are living in today is in need of change. We cannot continue to walk the current path that threatens the future for all of us. It is our opinion that the real change needed around climate change is a change of the heart. We must become stewards of our own hearts before we can become stewards of the earth. As elders and knowledge keepers, we share our knowledge to provide a direction that can help us move forward to a much more sustainable earth. Technological development has advanced without a foundation of values, which has brought a great deal of dehumanization and alienation to our present reality. We don't advise you to build a pipeline or not to build a pipeline, although obviously we are not in support of choices that harm the earth and our future. We have an opportunity to set a completely new narrative. We can create a new economy and new opportunities for the nation based on stewardship. We fully realize our current structures and systems will not change overnight. We have thousands of years of knowledge and experience on how to live in peace and in balance with nature. What is needed is to form an alliance, a reciprocal relationship with the earth supporting her natural laws. Climate change should be viewed as an opportunity for us to reflect on ourselves and to make the necessary changes that will ensure a future for all our children.
So hello, everyone. I'm Ian Mauro. I'm the Executive Director of the Prairie Climate Centre at the University of Winnipeg, and on Treaty 1 territory in the homeland of the Métis Nation, and really humbled to be able to work with Brett and the team here. My journey into climate change actually started in the Canadian Arctic, and I was living in the first kind of decade of the 2000s on Baffin Island, living and learning with the Inuit. As first a student, I studied environmental science and got up there on this travel study course, and then as an instructor. And so I was living every summer in a place called Pangnirtung, and got the privilege to develop a postdoc project with Zacharias Kunuk. So Zach Kunuk there is on the left, the great Inuk filmmaker that made Atanadjo at the Fast Runner. and we made a film called Inuit Knowledge and Climate Change. And it really kind of opened up my mind to how Indigenous knowledges and wisdom, fit together with participatory research to, in many ways, change the world. This was a fairly groundbreaking project and film led by, Zach and the Inuit communities that we worked with. And so that opportunity to do this work really changed my life and made me want to commit to that collaboration with Indigenous communities. I'm a settler person myself, but following OCAP principles. So ensuring that ownership, control, access, and possession of research done with communities, by, with, and for communities is really kind of central to the work that we do. And that's part of, that trust, that respect, that reciprocity of giving back and forth to one another. And Brett was talking about the late Elder Dave Kershane, and when I came back to Winnipeg, I'm originally from Winnipeg, I had the privilege of meeting Danny Blair and some of the climate team here at the University of Winnipeg, and we were thinking about building the Prairie Climate Centre. And we said, Western science isn't the only way of dealing with this. We need to be engaging and really seeking the guidance of Indigenous communities. And so I had the opportunity to meet the late Elder Dave Kershane. And the first thing that I did was pass him tobacco and say, Elder, we need your guidance, and we have questions around how to structure relationships and structure research in a good way. And starting off on that protocol really did kind of create that mutual respect. And I think Elder Kershane realized, like, this is the real deal. This team is looking for a real partnership. And so the Turtle Lodge here on the top left is just outside of Sagin First Nation, and an incredible place. And we had the great opportunity to work with Elder Kershane, who just passed away in the past few months. And he invited us into the lodge with cameras to document the things that were going on. And this is the Anjasea gathering, which I'll speak about momentarily, but to help document what was being said, what was being articulated, the vision of these elders. And it was an international gathering that brought Indigenous leaders from across the Americas together to talk about climate change. It happened over 4 days a number of years ago, and was a very, very powerful event that we continued to collaborate on with Elder Kershane. Laura Cameron, who did a master's degree here at the University of Winnipeg with me, but also worked at the Prairie Climate Centre, developed some kind of academic literature with Dave and Sabina Jazz at the Turtle Lodge and myself as part of her master's. And this paper, A Change of Heart, Indigenous Perspectives from the Anjasea Summit, was published in Climatic Change, which is a fairly significant climate change journal. And it was an amazing thing, right? I would consider myself a Westerner, a scientist, but somebody who's fairly conversant with communities, Indigenous wisdom. And yet in this conversation, Elder Kershane would often invoke, a direction at the start of the gathering. And it was very much about climate change, but very quickly it veered off and it became this long multi-day conversation about things that I didn't initially consider to be climate related. And I was sitting there and, Laura's got her master's thesis, and it's like, oh my goodness, are we getting what we think we need to be getting out of this? And there is this kind of slightly extractive thinking on my part, right? Like, is this going to work for the purpose of this kind of research? And, I'm telling you this kind of honestly, because, even as you work towards kind of working through reconciliation and respect, sometimes you have these kind of, relapses into that colonial thinking, and, am I getting what I need? And I had this kind of doubt. I was like, oh my goodness, are we going to get this? And through this long multi-day conversation about all of the kind of constellations of factors that make us human and what it means to be human, the elders came back and landed on climate change. And they very clearly said that, these colonial values that have been imposed on all of us, the greed, the arrogance, the anger, the dominance, the selfishness, the competitiveness, disrespect, ignorance, those human values are what is causing the human condition that leads to the behaviors of extraction, exploitation, pollution, war, violence, and climate change, biodiversity loss, water pollution, these other issues. Those are the symptoms. The cause is not climate change. The symptoms are climate change. The cause is the human condition. And so the elders were saying there is this need for a change of heart, the human heart, rethinking what it means to be human. And it was kind of mind blowing, right? Where, my assumption just kind of getting swirled around and realizing, wait a second, you just need to listen. You need to just follow the guidance. You need to trust in the process. And this is what came out of this paper, and very powerful kind of paper that identifies how these problems can be addressed through, thinking through the knowledges and traditions of communities that lead to these Indigenous-led solutions that really do have kind of sustainability and traction and durability for future generations. And so out of this gathering, there were a series of calls to action. Many people referenced this as a significant document. We made a series of videos that came out of this. And so it's a very exciting project. Again, Laura Cameron deserves a lot of credit here. Her master's thesis was very much kind of predicated on this. And we also had Laura and a team, Kevin Setti, who some of you might know, and Marcel Kreitzer, who is a filmmaker here at the Prairie Climate Centre, go across the Canadian Prairies, continuing to expand this work and this thinking. And all of these films were made through the course of Laura's master's project. And then a subsequent paper was actually developed, which was just published in the past year, around Indigenous knowledge and climate change initiatives across the Canadian Prairies. And out of this work, you can kind of see the sites on the map where communities were engaged and videos were made. But there was a larger kind of thematic analysis that came out around climate solutions and that idea of Indigenous leadership, capacity and self-sufficiency, sustainable economic development, connection to land, connection with and sharing of Indigenous knowledges, and bridging that with Western science. And so our team has been, at this for a while, in a fairly high resolution way, across broad geographies, and specifically the Canadian Prairies, as this particular article shows. And so as we were kind of building this momentum, we were developing all of these kinds of tools. And our team had made the Climate Atlas of Canada, which some of you will know and we'll show you in a second. But that was the first national tool to develop climate model data for the country. And we realized when we launched it in 2018 that there was a groundbreaking tool, but a wholly inadequate tool, in that it was a colonial map. It had the boundaries of provinces and territories, and it had settler place names. And to us, that was not good enough. And we wanted to honor these relationships, honor, the fact that this is Indigenous land. This country called Canada is on Indigenous land. And so how do we do that? And so we brought people together to develop an Indigenous advisory committee. And again, this is an image from Turtle Lodge on the right, Elder Cashane sitting in the chair. And we brought First Nations, Inuit, and Métis leadership from across coast to coast to coast together to talk about, well, how could we decolonize this map? How could we indigenize this map? How could we create a new map of this, country, and foreground Indigenous knowledges and Indigenous people and Indigenous places and Indigenous data? And people like Shilawat Kluche, or Silawat Kluche on the left there, the Inuk Nobel Prize nominee, climate advocate, who is the pioneering work in climate change and human rights, set a whole new discourse for the world, literally. And she was here and is a close friend. Others who helped guide us. And so we're here, in a manner that respects all of these relationships that allowed this kind of project to kind of unfold. And as we kind of scaled this up, we started talking to the Assembly of First Nations. They actually passed a resolution in Assembly at their annual general forum, where they suggested that the Climate Atlas of Canada and the Prairie Climate Centre worked very closely with AFN's Environment and Climate Committee to make sure that this project came to realization. And so, again, that process of working in a good way, seeking consent at every stage and at every, way you can to ensure that people are in agreement and guiding the process. The Métis National Council, we had been developing some projects with, and they said, yeah, we want to see this happen. And so through these diverse partnerships at the community level, at the individual level, at the organizational level, we were able to develop this Indigenous kind of climate atlas, which we just launched in the past week and a bit. And so we're going to talk about that. But we've got at the launch, we had Kluwani Adamek, who is the regional chief for the Yukon and the lead for climate environment for AFN's national programs. Sila was there, Casti Kedon, the president of the Métis Nation, and they're the Métis National Council. And so we launched this, and it was amazing. There was such a huge uptake of interest in this. It was such a positive story. One of the things I've been saying is that in the last intergovernmental panel assessment that was released just in the past couple of months, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that the report was an atlas of human suffering. Let's take that in for a second. An atlas of human suffering. And what we've been saying is we've launched an atlas of hope, resilience, and community building. And Brett here, you know, has just, his leadership has been critical to this. And a lot of the media picked up on that, and how Brett's work to kind of bridge these different worlds has been so critical. And so we're going to show you this tool. Just a couple days ago, the Toronto Star launched an article, At Last, an Atlas of Indigenous Knowledge. And so pretty exciting times. And so we're hot off that launch, and we want to show you some of this through a live demo. And Brett, why don't you kind of jump in there?
Yeah, so when we entered the Climate Atlas, one of the things that we did at the beginning was we talked about changing how it welcomes you when you arrive to the Atlas. So we reworked the icon at the top, and we started to put different languages, either words that say hello or welcome. And so it wasn't just in English and just in French, two languages that are the colonization language of the country. And I also removed the borders from the provinces to give a representation of just the land itself, and something that's more associated to the vast communities and the vastness of the territories. And moving down to the Indigenous Knowledge section, the icon, I wanted to have something that kind of represented multiple nations, languages, and cultures. And all of those things come from the land itself. So this icon is representative of the sun, the earth, and all of the things that are part of our existence, solar system. And it represents the land itself in the shape of Rosetta. So something that also associated with guidance in the map. So if we click into the Indigenous Knowledges section itself, one of the important things that you'll notice is we've taken a distinctions-based approach to the information and data that's in there. So you can actually see there's a section for First Nations communities, Inuit communities, as well as Métis projects. And when you get in there, there's also a section on Indigenous knowledges and climate change. And this is to focus on talking about, you know, why is Indigenous knowledge important to climate change research? How does colonialism impact climate change? And talking about the 7-generation solutions, how we're looking into the future. What are we doing for now, for the future generations to come? And when you move on to the First Nations section, when you click in there, you can actually see different topics. Assembly First Nations National Climate Gathering was an amazing gathering we did a video on. And then you also have the Anjase Key Initiative that Ian talked about, and inside you find more information on it, as well as the articles that were published along with. It's like a brief version of the article, but it's linked to the main article, so you can actually check it out. And then down, as you scroll down, you can see there's Assembly First Nations definition of the climate lens, a video that explores the definition of what AFN sees as the climate lens, and looking through this lens to find solutions in the future. There's also connections to documentaries about people on the land who are both in the academic world, but also in the knowledges world, and how those things are really important to finding how things are impacting our cultures, our ways of life, and our livelihood. And this is a really great video about Rose Roberts, who's a trapper, but also a PhD, who lives on the land, knows the land. And then when you when you scroll down through the, sorry, my throat's just getting a little itchy. Through each of the sections are going to contain articles that have been published, and also videos and documentaries that have been created by the PCC team and those who have worked with us. And each of these videos are related to work that is being done within the communities, either First Nations communities, or, as you'll see later, Inuit communities or Métis projects.
I might jump in there one second, Brett. This one, the Focusing on Climate Change project, we developed with the Kainai First Nation and Samson Cree in Alberta. And this was a really neat project, because these are actually participatory videos that the community made, that youth were really engaged in making. And so this work, you know, in the prairie context, there's a lot of really neat specific projects about the prairies. And so again, this one was actually youth making the videos. And so we were involved in this kind of project to find local observations of climate change, and very, very community grounded. And this is actually one of the few examples where the communities were actually hands-on making the films at every stage. And sometimes we have, you know, youth involved in this stuff, but this was a specific project where it was all about the youth making their own films. And that's kind of a feature inside this section, which is kind of neat and notable and prairie specific. So
Yeah, yeah, forgive I get allergies right now. Springtime is popping out and I didn't take my pill this morning, so my spring allergies are kicking in. So I might have to let Ian take over a little bit more every now and then as I get my throat and my nasal cavities getting itchy. So next we have the Inuit section, and this is near and dear to Ian's heart as he spent a lot of his time up there. But it's an amazing film about Silawat Kluche and the work she does. And we've also been able to place in here the ITK National Climate Strategy. And this is something that's really important for the North, perspectives on Northern impacts of climate change. And then Ian, you want to talk about Elder Jonas?
Yeah, Elder Jonas Karpic, he's actually one of the elders that I worked with extensively in Pang, and we've been kind of meeting with him over the years and bringing in his insights, and really, really tremendous and humbling to kind of continue that work. The film I made with Zach Kunuk is in here. We had another master's student, Natalie Baird, who worked in Pangnirtung, and this is actually another really neat video about youth perspectives in Pangnirtung, and really well done video with kind of youth. And then the Métis content, and obviously we're in the Métis homeland here in the prairies. And this was a really great process whereby we actually worked with the Métis National Council and their Environment Committee, but we also had a summer student, Joël Jobin, who helped coordinate a lot of this. And we also worked with Métis filmmaker Chris Gaudry, who's actually here in Winnipeg. And he made a series of videos, these blue ones on Métis knowledge and climate change. This is kind of an overview piece. This is one of those videos that were made across the prairies about renewables and the first kind of Métis-owned community solar project in Green Lakes. So it's really solution-oriented stuff, really fun, interesting projects. This is Métis Wildland Firefighters. This is one of my favorite films.
Yeah, I was going to say it was one of my favorites too. I definitely recommend people watch this one. There's a lot of familiar knowledges that you'll see in there. If you have come from communities who practice controlled burns in the past, you'll see a lot of the information they share in there as well. It's very familiar. It's a really good film.
Yeah, and we met these Métis Wildland firefighters at a fire conference and started talking with them, and there was, you know, I think a slight reluctance where they were like, cameras, film, you know, are we going to do this? And we chatted with them and said, you know, your perspectives matter. Like, you folks are on the front lines of these issues. And as we know, wildfires are increasing across, you know, the world, but here, you know, in the western part of the country and the prairies, it's a major issue. And when you hear these folks talk about containing fire and managing fire and doing it with Indigenous wisdom, you can't help but feel like we are in good hands when Indigenous people are leading some of these responses. This is about fishing in St. Laurent, and we just made this film last year where the lake ice on Lake Manitoba is thinning, and the economic impact on Métis fishers in this Métis community of St. Laurent, it's serious, and they're seeing this stuff. And so, you know, there's challenges, there's opportunities, there's all these kinds of things. This is an amazing film with dendroclimatologist Colin Larocque, who's a Métis scientist, looking at how he threads the needle on these things. Climate and conservation, looking at Indigenous protected and conserved areas, or IPCAs, which are really starting to become one of the critical management strategies to protect land and ensure that protection and that conservation is done with Indigenous wisdom. And so this specific video looks at that, and there's some really neat IPCAs starting to get created across the Canadian prairies, which are real like focal points for opportunity and resilience and creating the change that we hope to see, you know, moving forward. So Brett, did you want to maybe introduce the map here?
Yeah, so just before we go on, we do have a film included on here where we talk about this. So again, going through a brief little run through about the Indigenous Knowledge section as well as the map. So what we're doing now, but just a very brief. So if there's something you forgot that we were talking about, it's in that video. You can see it again there. But now we're going to jump over to the Indigenous Climate Map. So the Climate Atlas itself, when it was introduced, brought this information and data to urban centers across the country, to municipalities, and they were able to access the data that they have from their communities. But one of the things, like Ian was talking about at the beginning, that was very lacking in the project itself was the Indigenous Knowledge's component to it. And one of the things that we've introduced is an Indigenous button here. When you click on that button, again, you can see that it breaks it down into First Nations communities, Inuit communities, and Métis projects. And this is something that is incredibly important because we're showing the world a different map of Canada. Even Canadians do not understand the spread of Indigenous communities across these lands. And further to that, you know, I always talk about, like, in particular, I can speak to my nation. The reservation communities in my area, they're just the communities that are there, but our whole nation has territory of over 35,000 square kilometers, more when you include our allies, the Wet'suwet'en. These are really important to know, like, you know, this information is now available to the communities that you come from, to the communities that you're located on, and you can access the same information, but also more than that, you're going to be able to look at the research that you're doing within your community or the planning you're doing in your community, and you're going to have resources that can back up that planning and research that you're doing. And also, if you want to connect with knowledges that are being shared from other communities, the documentary films that we have will be there. And in the future, we hope to add more to this. And in the north, you have the 53 different Inuit communities that are up in the north, and those haven't even been included prior to, with regards to any research. So this is incredibly important for the people in northern communities. And you can speak a little bit more about the content itself that you can actually access through the map.
Yeah, and so as we kind of zoom into the prairies, but think about the prairies in the context of the larger country, you know, the loss of the cold. And so when we think about climate change, you know, as we kind of mentioned, you know, the Arctic is a barometer of that change globally. And we know that the loss of the cold is happening, and that has huge impacts on the jet stream and, you know, weather in southern, you know, areas. And what we're seeing here is less and more climate change. And this corresponds to RCPs, which are basically the emission scenarios. And this is kind of the business as usual scenario. And then we've got time periods. And so you can click back into various time periods. And so if we're looking at a high carbon far future in 2051 to 2080, you can click. And so I was mentioning Pangnirtung, where I've spent a lot of time. You can click on this community, and you will look at right now the loss of minus 30 days. So in the historical baseline, there was about 43, or actually 43 observed minus 30 days. And in that high carbon far future, it could drop on average to, you know, by 40 days, leaving very few minus 30 days in this place. And if you've ever been to the Arctic, you know, permafrost and the buildings that are structured upon it, the airport runways, the roads, delivery of services, all of these things, this is huge, huge change that will also affect northern parts of the prairies. And so obviously there aren't Inuit communities specifically here. So what you do is you go to the map and say, well, let's look at First Nation communities then. And again, this is the first time these data have been made available, mapped, and accessible for people to think about. And Brett was talking about planning. This isn't just a cool website. It is actually for applied resilience planning. And so if we kind of go up into, you know, some of these northern parts of say Manitoba, the Northlands, Dene-Siouxland First Nation, you know, the loss of minus 30 days in these areas, many of them requiring ice roads and, you know, types of natural infrastructure that ensure that you know, they can get goods and services in and out in a regular and predictable way. So this is serious stuff to kind of think about that. And for example, you're like, okay, ice roads, let's think about that further. Well, you go to Garden Hill First Nation and you can actually see a film about northern ice roads and how that is going to be impacted. But you can also watch a film about the Meacham project and how the Garden Hill First Nation is actually developing food security and has a northern farm, and they're trying to kind of ensure that their food sovereignty is first and foremost. And so the map is actually, as Brett said, distinctions based, but the videos are all First Nations. When you click on Inuit, it's all Inuit videos and Métis, for example. And so that's a really neat kind of functionality of the map. If you go, say, into Saskatchewan, this is the Rose Roberts video, and really encourage you to look at this. And this one is like almost like a meditation on the forest and the trap line in the changing environment. You really hear out Dr. Rose Roberts and the things that she's thinking. You know, in Alberta, the Lubicon Creek Culture Camp, and so how culture camp and language and all of these things fit together to create resilience. And, you know, the fact that communities like the Lubicon Cree Nation are doing, renewable energy projects in the heart of the oil sands, and how innovative and amazing that is. If you go here, you've got Indigenous Climate Action and some of the really interesting kind of advocacy work being done, the Montana First Nation and the solar projects that they have. And so there's these stories of hope and resilience and climate impacts as well. And we've got Dr. Leroy Littlebear talking about buffalo conservation and how restoration of ecosystems are part of climate solutions. And so all of this, is coupled with the data. Then the data shows there's going to be some challenges, but the communities show that there's going to be some incredible opportunities for resilience. And so there's lots of opportunities to kind of look at different data here. So we looked at minus 30 days. One of the ones that we often look at is plus 30 days. And so, here in Manitoba, if we go to Swan Lake First Nation, the number of plus 30 days in the historical baseline is about 13. And that's going to jump up by about 36 plus 30 days on average to have an average of about 50 plus 30 days in that 2051 to 2080 baseline. But if you take a look at this, that is the kind of baseline here. That's the average. But what you're seeing is 24 global climate models bouncing up and down. And in an extreme year, in an extreme model, it could be upwards of 75 plus 30 days. So if you think about the elders, if you think about, infrastructure, if you think about air conditioning capacity, if you think about, water availability, if you think about agriculture and drought, all of these things, impacts on ecosystems, these are very, very serious kinds of climate futures that we need to be planning for. And so if you're the community of Swan Lake, you can download this report, you can download the data, you can get information for funding, for programs, for program design, resilience efforts. There is a huge opportunity here with these data now made available. And we haven't mentioned the Métis communities. And so the Métis Nation, because there isn't, say, reserve communities in the exact same kind of way, they ask for their projects to be mapped across the Métis homeland. And so they've got education projects, there's community-based monitoring, there's guardian projects, there's all kinds of interesting things being done in various locations, climate preparedness workshops, and all kinds of things that are, again, bringing hope and opportunity for communities. And then mixed in here, you can see the various films that have been made. And the neat thing there is that it connects, this global climate model data anchored down to place and to the actual perspectives of people. And so there's a really innovative, way of two-eyed seeing, as we mentioned, that is inside this thing. And I think we're kind of getting ready to wrap up here. Brett, is there anything else you wanted to mention about the map before we kind of pivot to say some final slides?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we always have to remember, now we're hearing in the media about people having to deal with change on the ecosystems and the lands as if it's something new. They're saying in the Western world, it's something it's unprecedented. We haven't seen this before. But the thing is, we as Indigenous people have seen this for the past 100 years. Industrialization of our territories have been brought drastic ecological change to the land. So we are resilient. We are adaptation. And this is the perspective that we are trying to bring to the world so that we can share our information with them. And how are we surviving? How are we keeping our cultures alive through all of the things that we've been through? This is our story of hope to share to the people, because we are the ones who've always been stewards of the land, and we have to continue to try to do this through everything that is put in front of us, through all the things that we go through. We have to continue on, because this is for our children and children's children and the generations to come. And this is why this work is so important. And I really hope that we provide a tool for all of you to be able to continue doing this important work, because it's going to be up to all of us and all of those who are here listening to be able to utilize this and move forward to the future in a very, very good and a very real way, in collaboration and work with one another. And because everything that we continue doing now as Indigenous people, if we're allowed to be who we are, then the land will flourish and thrive. And that's not just assumption from what we see. There are actual studies that are proving that now. If you look at studies that are being done out of University of British Columbia, they talk about how biodiversity is increased and higher on Indigenous managed lands than they are in any other. So it's important work that we do, and I just hope that everyone takes that to heart.
Thank you, Brett. And concurrent to all of this work, we actually launched a series of Indigenous kind of knowledge courses. And you can see them here. We actually spent time with Albert Marshall, the kind of person who helped coin two-eyed seeing, as Brett mentioned, Leslie Spillett, Elder Leslie Spillett, we Steve DeRoy talking about Indigenous mapping, and then climate solutions from Indigenous perspectives with a bunch of leaders in Manitoba. And so those will be forthcoming on the Climate Atlas, so actual kind of training that goes along with this. And then through our partners with Climate West, we've developed a climate information and data guide, and so you can actually go to Climate West's website, and that helps kind of think through how do you use these data and what is available and what are they specific for. And so there's actual guides out there that we've developed. The Climate West, along with the Prairie Regional Adaptation Collaborative, has reports out, which is also available on Climate West's website, around preparing how prepared the prairie provinces are. And so there's actual Indigenous data in here from various communities and other things, and so that's all kind of downloadable on the various websites. And so we want to quickly kind of pivot to questions. But I also just wanted to kind of show you again the Climate West website here. There's a bunch of things, and in terms of the resources and publications, and then the PRAC. So there's some really interesting things out there. The Prairie Climate Centre and the Climate Atlas is one tool, but there's some really powerful networks that I think are valuable as we move forward in a good way, in partnership between science, Western knowledge, Indigenous knowledges. And on that note, I think we're ready to kind of answer any questions folks might have.
All right, so there wasn't many questions. So if there's people still hesitating, here's a chance to shine. We have a question from Amy. She's wondering, are there ways you are trying to add in content that gets to the root of the problem? By this, I mean the changes that are needed to the human condition that the elders mentioned in Mauro's research.
Brett, did you want to take a crack at that?
I'd say like just that, when we post the stories that come from the communities, I think they provide a lot of insight into solutions or possible solutions in the way that they're looking at those in their communities. I mean, really what I hope people kind of take from the content that we have is that they themselves kind of feel the responsibility and feel the support and the ability to be able to make the changes within their own communities. And by that, I mean, how are you going to, hold accountable the people who are making the decisions to change the lands? How are we going to work together in a good way to be able to view the world as not just a commodified thing to extract from, but rather a living being that we need to protect because it provides us with clean water and air. Because one thing I always say to people, policies don't create water, policies don't create clean air. The only thing that comes from is the earth. And there's no such thing as a standard safe amount to extract anything that will not change the land itself. And it's not to say that my people have been against any sort of progress at all. It's just there's ways that we have done things as Indigenous people that still allowed us to stay a part of the ecosystem while we were trying to flourish economically as well. Our people had a very strong economy for thousands of years on our territories that dealt with trade and export and import, and also extraction of certain resource, but we did in a way that we understood that everything we did impacted every single aspect of our ecosystem. So that's just the perspective that I think we need to bring forward. And I hope that people get that through the stories and stuff that we put to the Climate Atlas and the content that we share and the research that's shared. I hope that those perspectives are shared with everyone in that way.
And so some people were just asking, how do you get it? It is available, climateatlas.ca. And so we launched this we launched the tool in 2018, but we launched all the Indigenous content literally last week. And this is this is the first kind of webinar after the launch that we've done. So it's a pleasure to be here and to be invited into this space, to be able to kind of support the work that the Green Action Center is doing, but also to connect with more folks that are interested in this. And I saw some questions around, is there a process for communities that would like to contribute to the Atlas? And I think right now it's get in touch with us. We have various networks where we're kind of working and developing projects. But for communities that are interested, we receive information at our info email all the time. And the thing that we've often said, like, the Atlas is not a cool website. It's a network of relationships in a very real way. And it's not a product, it's really a process, and it's ongoing. And in the academic literature, they talk about these kind of digital maps as living maps. And we really do see it in that way, and that, the people that we are working with, enrich and enliven and really do kind of bring life to this. And there's really neat books out there. There's a woman named Jennifer Wemigwans who wrote a book called A Digital Bundle about how you put Indigenous knowledge online, and how do you do that, and how do you do it in a good way, and what are the protocols when you have this. And we take that really, really serious. We've been in ceremony around the kind of development of this thing. And Brett and I have been talking about, how do we, reground ourselves since we've launched this thing. And so we're in the process of engaging the larger community, and people can reach out to us at any point to talk about potential projects and how this could kind of work moving forward. Yeah. Just looking at
I was curious, you had mentioned the National Climate Gathering. When and where was that held, and the topics were covered? What was your takeaway from it?
Yeah, well, we got invited by AFN to come up to, it was in Whitehorse, and it was in Whitehorse, March 2020. And it was literally the last gathering that any of us had gone to before the pandemic hit, and it was remarkable. And Brett, I don't know if you want to jump in there and talk about it, but the two videos in the First Nation section, the one overview video gives you a really good sense of what some of the key themes were, and then that Climate Lens video has some of the leading kind of First Nations kind of folks on climate change talking about this idea of the climate lens, and what a First Nation lens on climate change looks like. And so we're continuing to work with AFN, and there's links to their annual, or the report out of that national gathering as well off the website.
Yeah, that national gathering was, it was their first gathering, and it was a way for them to be able to kind of scope out what it was going to be like for them working with the new climate lens, and what it also means, what a climate lens would mean, and how it could benefit the people, not just culturally, but even politically. And they have been interested in creating more gatherings for people, but again, because of COVID, that slowed a lot of things down. But they do want to have more gatherings that are inclusive of more of the greater community online. And I think that's something that would happen hopefully in the next year or 2 years. And but usually climate gatherings as well, they don't happen often, because like the idea of conserving and not getting everyone to travel into one place at once, they usually only happen every 2 to even sometimes 4 years, and then the rest of the time communication is usually done online or on online forums. But yeah, I think one of the things that I try to get communities to do too is to maybe even put together their own groups and committees with where they're from. That it's really about the people being able to create solutions. I think sometimes we kind of leave it up too much to political leadership, but really this is something that's going to happen from the ground up. It's going to happen from the people. And I don't just mean like what you do to recycle at home, but I mean actually contributing to actual solutions in the future. Those who actually live on the land and are coming from the land, who understand the land better than anyone, I think have an important responsibility to contribute to any of these information sessions, because sometimes a lot of us who are working out here don't get the opportunity to be on the land as much as we love to. I grew up on the land where I'm from, but I've been living in Winnipeg now for 16 years, and I still get out as much as I can, but these aren't my lands. You know, I'm just a guest here, and I just visit whenever I'm invited. It's just how our protocol works where I'm from. And but where I'm from, I can do whatever I want, be wherever I want. You know, so those are the things that I think are important, is when you share that information. I've worked on projects where we brought a lot of knowledge keepers in who, you know, didn't think they would have something to contribute, because they're like, oh, that's not in our field of work. Well, you know, even though you might just look at yourself as a trapper or someone who does that kind of stuff on the land, your insights are incredibly important. The knowledges and stuff that you share really do help a lot of research and researchers going through large amounts of data. You know, there's insights and perspectives that, you know, you might not even see yourself until you connect with other knowledge keepers or researchers or academics. That's the whole point of gatherings. So I hope more people can do more of these gatherings within their own communities, and hopefully they can travel with their information to, you know, national level as well.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I was just wondering, like, if they're in the works of planning another national climate gathering, hopefully more central to Canada.
They are actually, it sounds like the fall might be the next one. And when you see that Indigenous leadership, and in that case, First Nations leadership, like stand up and be present and create there, and the video actually talks about this, like creating space for that dialogue. You know, it's a very different conversation, and I think that's where, you know, the two-eyed seeing, you know, helps, where you kind of bring science and Indigenous wisdom together. But there's also, you know, a complete conversation about what First Nations knowledges are and what the priorities are. And when people like Graham Reed, the senior policy advisor for EFN on climate change, talks about this, you know, he literally says in the video, you know, there's this obsession with, you know, either greenhouse gas mitigation or adaptation. And it shouldn't be this binary. It's actually the whole state of the world and this holistic perspective on it. And what Indigenous peoples in many ways are bringing is that complete worldview. And we're not segmenting it into a program or segmenting it into an initiative that, you know, is just so linear that you don't capture the whole range of opportunities and also things that need to be considered. And so again, the effort here is to document these things in partnership in a good way, bring that to the forefront, link to data, you know, so that a complete understanding of the world and a complete response is possible. And, you know, we're kind of wrapping up here, but this session was focused on the prairies. You know, obviously the Atlas is coast to coast to coast, but the prairies are a really interesting spot. You know, we are seeing some massive impacts here, you know, between the droughts and the floods and the wildfires. But we are also really, really in an excellent space to respond. And again, when you see those videos layered across the prairie region, you see the actual scale of the opportunity that people are making for themselves and the communities are leading on. You know, it's something that I think does make people pause for a second and say, wait, there's a different way here. There's a different way to do it. And so we're hoping to kind of, you know, be part of that conversation and support communities in those efforts. And when communities are leading, those solutions are just so much more meaningful. And so, you know, that I think is just central to the work.
Okay. Now, before we finish getting the rest of those questions, I was wondering how can people move from climate change to climate justice?
Brett, do you want to jump in there?
Well, I think a lot of that, just climate justice is always kind of again, it's that very political term that is important. It's important work that needs to be done, you know, trying to find that commonality, that ability to be able to see that the land is a being itself and that it has rights of its own. And you know, that's a perspective, again, that comes from Indigenous communities. And when we talk about climate justice, for me, I always look at it as affording those rights to all things that live on the lands. the Gitxsan way of knowing and way of being viewed the world as equal to what we are. And that's the main kind of thing, right? When you have a patriarchal perspective of the world, you view yourself at the center. The way we are, where I'm from, we view ourselves as just a part of a greater cycle. We are just a part of all of the things within our ecosystem. So when we seek climate justice, especially in our communities, we're doing it on behalf of the things that can't speak, such as the water and the salmon and the ecosystems we come from. And when we do that, I think we don't really see how resilient the land is itself yet. We don't know for a fact what it can do to recover if we just let it. We saw a little bit of that with the pandemic when people stopped driving. You saw a little bit of decrease in the CO2, not enough to make any substantial change, but you see most of that comes from industry still. So I think if we are to look for climate justice for the different things within our ecosystems, maybe the world can recover in a quick way. Maybe we will see recovery, because we don't know how well the ecosystems can recover on their own. We haven't given them a chance to yet completely. I think the pandemic has proven to us that we can do it. I mean, they've obviously stopped the world for something that doesn't actually kill as many people as climate change does on an annual basis. I mean, I can say that without, there's no for sure about that, but you could say a lot of the natural disasters are kind of starting to be more tied and linked to climate change impacts, which do kill a lot of people around the globe and destroy a lot of infrastructure and also agriculture. So there's a lot of different things that come from climate change impacts. So climate justice itself, I think, touches on a lot of bases, but I think for Indigenous peoples, climate justice is more focused on how we can speak for the land.
Yes, you hit the nail on the head. As my spirit name, Sacred Tree Woman, I feel it's been more prevailing my connection to that land, because all these living beings do not have a voice. There's no one to, they can't physically speak up for themselves. So it's like us as human beings, we have to be the ones to step in there and protect them. So really love that. So we'll just wrap up with a couple more questions and then we'll do a wrap up. Claudia was asking, do you have opportunities to work with regenerative farmers or ranchers?
Yeah, I can answer that. And so obviously, we showed you the Indigenous content here today, but if you take a look at the larger kind of content on the Atlas, there's an agriculture section, for example, and inside there's actually a number of regenerative agriculture stories with non-Indigenous peoples, but people who are really working to be good stewards of the land. And that regenerative agriculture is really interesting. It's not dissimilar to what Leroy Little Bear was talking about with respect to bringing the bison back to the land. And a lot of these cattle ranchers, for example, that are practicing a very different non-industrial kind of form of cattle ranching, they actually are trying to bring animals back to the land in a way that mimics bison, being on the land and matting down and driving carbon sequestration into these kind of ecosystems. And it's incredible. It is really incredible when you see, again, those kinds of solutions that are taking place on the prairies, and what farmers are doing to look at, what the thousands of years of, the prairie used to look like, and how do we restore that and be good stewards of land, as non-Indigenous peoples. And so there's a lot of neat kind of content and stories, and Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples across the regions, trying to make a difference. And so that stuff is all in there as well.
I have Yaz asking, when have Indigenous people started seeing the effects of climate change, and how long ago?
Brett, you want to take that?
Sorry, what was that?
It was, when have Indigenous people started seeing the effects of climate change, and how long ago?
Oh, it's since the industrialization of the world. Like, since we started to see fossil fuels being burned more, we started to notice the impacts immediately. I know of my people didn't make contact until around 1856. And we didn't have settlers in my community until 1876. And in around the early 1900s, we were talking about the changes we were seeing in the Pacific Northwest. I don't know what it was like anywhere else, but what we were noticing was there was a change, a very slight change in the pattern in which like the salmon were returning or when they were leaving to go to the ocean. So the salmon, they go to the ocean to grow. They spend about 2 or 3 years in the ocean after they leave their nursing ponds or creeks or tributaries, and then they come back. So that started to slightly change. And then also we noticed that certain medicines and things were blooming at a very different time, like either a little bit earlier or, you know, changing in when species were breeding. Those are the kinds of stories that we had from back then that elders were trying to talk to the government about. And I think there was an article in National Geographic recently where they found a diary from a fisheries officer from 1919. And we actually noted in there that the elders said that we shouldn't overfish the salmon because it's going to impact the ecosystem. And he said he wrote it down as a note, not thinking it was any real vital information. Little did they know when they did the studies in the 1980s, 90s, that it was all factual. So a lot of that kind of stuff is we've been experiencing it since industrialization. But further to that, when you talk about the non-man-made climate change that happens over thousands of years, we've been through those, but nothing this fast. We've never seen it happen this fast in our histories before on a global scale. You know, so that we know that comes from the man-made impacts.
Good point. So wrapping up, somebody was wondering like how can like their family get involved? Like what kind of actions, you know, could they do to address climate change in, you know, whether urban settings or northern, remote, rural communities?
I think just from my perspective, and you know, probably have other information too. I think keeping a diary of things they notice changing within their family, like how they're harvesting or the species that they work with or migration patterns, things like that they can talk about with their elders, noting those down in a book or even making little videos on YouTube. That information is actually gathering some data that can be vital down the road when we start accumulating that, putting that together with other knowledge keepers or people. I think that's where you're going to start to really see impacts happening directly to the families and to the people who are on the land. And that's vital, important information as well. So I think recording, like being your community scientist, recording that information down is important. Because, you know, that's something my family did. We talk about the changes on our Lachiep, our territory. We have documentation about, you know, how things have changed over my lifetime. You know, I'm going to be 40 this year. So that's 40 years of information that my family has. And there's drastic change that I've seen in my lifetime on my territory. And I think that information is important. And on top of that, you know, like if your community doesn't have any recycling programs, or food sovereignty programs, look at starting those. You know, the Meacham project that was in the Island Lakes area, really important project, a really important project. And, you know, that's something that I think every community can look at, and even just starting it on your own, and then maybe hopefully changing the minds of some of your community members and how they manage their waste. Those are the small things I think community members can do and help looking at their own futures.
Yeah.
And I might just jump in there, Chantal. Like, I think like climate solutions are inherently kind of personal, and they're inherently kind of located in the place in which you reside and who you are in your networks. And we have to be really careful, right? Because, you know, this conversation can get into really privileged elitist spaces, right? Where, you know, if you can't afford an electric car, well, are you doing enough for the environment or climate change? And that can't be the conversation, right? We can't have that kind of lens on this. And there's so many things that each and every one of us can do according to our means, according to our kind of networks, according to the spaces spaces that we inhabit. And I think that the opportunity there is that there's so much we can do. And, you know, it starts with, like, you know, cultural and environmental awareness. Like, if you haven't planted a seed recently, you should start. You know, if your kids haven't done so, you should make sure that they understand basic biology and where food comes from. You know, these are all things that we can be doing. And depending on the position that you are in, you know, in society and your vocation and whatever, you know, we have to make sure that climate change is a priority in each and every space that we occupy, because the impacts are so complete. Like, no one escapes climate change. No one escapes the kind of realities of what the science is suggesting is going to happen. And so, you know, people that get ahead of this, that educate themselves, that decide to take action, that decide to kind of, you know, future-proof their homes and their communities, you know, these are the communities that are going to have resilience. These are the communities that are going to be on the front lines of it at the scale of countries and provinces. Those jurisdictions that take this seriously, they're going to be more competitive. They are going to be, you know, safer. They are going to be attracting people, you know, for investment and living, because, you know, the serious nature of this is upon us. And so I think that there's just so many opportunities, and the neat thing is that when you take action, it's totally infectious, and the good kind of infection, right? Like, it overwhelms, and it's like, oh my goodness, like, I can see the change. It's positive. Let's just keep going. And that momentum, that opportunity to scale that hope and that adaptive capacity and resilience, reducing greenhouse gases in that kind of, you know, complete way, like, we're going to see a transformation. And, you know, it's hard to see it, you know, but in the rearview mirror, you know, it's like, whoa, we're living in this moment. We are literally in this moment right now where it's all going to change. And I think that, you know, we are going to be excited about that future that's forthcoming, because it's just going to be a healthier future if we make the right kinds of choices.
And you're speaking about that, I just remember someone mentioning that, you know, we need to stop denying climate change is in the future, when in fact it's actually happening here in the present. And that's, I think, a really big topic that people are just in denial of right now. So hopefully your work will definitely open up people's eyes and actually, you know, show the stats and the figures that, you know, the temperatures are actually, like, affecting people, communities, it's lowering. And especially here in Manitoba, what I've been hearing is, like, those winter roads, you know, those are very important for remote and rural communities where, you know, that's their only road throughout the year. And there's shorter and shorter days because of the weather is warming up north, that there's less and less time for those winter roads. So, and the Meacham project you had mentioned, Brett, was actually done with Aki Energy, who had the pleasure of working with. And there's also Aki Foods, which has a Northern Food Box initiative as well. And so check those out as well. And I believe we've pretty much answered all the questions here. So I just want to quickly share my screen, and then we could wrap it up. Okay. So we have one more webinar remaining in our 6-part series. Our final webinar. Go ahead, Amy.
Yes, our final webinar that Chantal organized will be featuring Audrey Logan from Dehydration Nations, and Audrey will be sharing about traditional food preservation and dehydration. So maybe one of the others on my team can share the link to sign up for that webinar in the chat. So please do check it out if you're interested. And Brett and Ian, we're very thankful that you're able to join us today. It's really exciting to see this Indigenous knowledge and information that you've compiled to help Indigenous communities make changes for climate change, and also to help us settlers decolonize our thinking about climate change. So thank you very much for that. And I just invite you to share any closing words.
Oh, before that, I just want to mention that if anyone has missed any webinars, please go to our YouTube channel. It's under Green Action Center, youtube.com users, Green Action Center playlists, and it'll be under the 2022 RISE webinar series. If you want to check out 2021 or 2020 RISE webinar series, they're also available on there as well. So this one will be uploaded within 2 business days. And if you want to reach out to us, you can reach out to us by email or follow us on Facebook or Instagram, or even join our new newsletter. So I welcome our presenters to say their closing remarks.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody for lending us their ears for the afternoon. I really appreciate that anytime that I have the honor of sharing with communities. And yeah, I just like to leave people with the idea just to remember that, you know, like Ian was saying, you don't have to all do the same thing. You do what you're able to do. That no matter what it is, that's the capacity you have is what you're going to be able to contribute. You know, where I'm from in my community, everyone contributes in their own way. We have people who know about fishing. So the fisheries, when they talk about monitoring the populations, they take our knowledge keepers out to help monitor the fish. You know, so they're contributing in that way. You know, so there's a lot of different things that people can do with their knowledges. And each person carries knowledge that someone else doesn't, but collectively together, your knowledges are very important. And yeah, I just hope that everyone takes that, does what they can within their own community, and don't place lower value on your knowledge. Just because someone might be of a different mindset, or, you know, like even myself, I can speak English very well. I can still tell stories in the Western world, but it does not mean that I know more than those of you that are out there. It just means I have the ability to communicate in a good way, and hopefully that can help bring out your knowledges. And that, you know, my grandmother always told me, you don't stop learning until you die. You're never going to be an expert on anything. You just keep learning. And I hope that's what everyone keeps doing. And thank you again for your time.
Ian?
I'd like Brett to have the last word, so I'm just going to say thanks and have a good day, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Have a good day.